First of all, let me appreciate this project of promotion of democratic federalism in Pakistan that is initiated by Hand Saddle Foundation. As we all know that federalism is one of the political systems of decentralization and political administration in multinational, multi-ethnic and plural societies. And federalism as a political system began its journey in 18th century with the American Constitution that was done in 1781, and later on it was modified and it was transformed into a federal constitution in 1788. Out of 29 existing federations in the world, Pakistan is one of the federations by virtue of its constitution. But unfortunately, because of many dynamics and reasons, federalism had never been a very successful model of governance in Pakistan. And the main reason is that the core principles and practices of federalism had never been honored or practiced in Pakistan at all levels, be it federal level or provincial level or the municipal local government level. And if we look at Pakistan's constitutional journey, Pakistan inherited its constitutional framework in 1947 with 1947 Independence Act, and that was a colonial act based on 1935 India Act. And we continued with that colonial act till 1956. And since it was a colonial sort of political arrangement, so it did not work well. In 1956, Pakistan made its own first ever federal constitution, but the problem was that before the making of 1956 constitution, just 1 year back, one unit was imposed in West Pakistan, and since it is a prerequisite of any viable federation that the constitutions are made with the consent of the federal units. And in West Pakistan, we did not have provinces, so there is a critique on the 1956 constitution that it was not also federal in that sense. And secondly, the constitution did not have bicameral legislature. And in 1962 constitution that was developed by Ayub Khan's regime, and it was a presidential sort of constitution, that also did not work well in terms of making Pakistan a genuine, inclusive, decentralized federation. In 1973, Pakistan started its federal journey with the newly made constitution, and it did introduce bicameral legislature. But unfortunately, due to many arbitrations and many amendments, 1973 constitution was also transformed in a quasi-presidential and quasi-parliamentary system. In that context, in 2006, two major political parties of Pakistan, PPP and PMLN, agreed on one thing, that when they would come in power, they would restore the original spirit of 1973 constitution, and they would modify the constitution. So in that context, on the basis of that Charter of Democracy, in 2010, the process was initiated in Pakistan, and 18th amendment was made in the constitution. And I strongly believe that though Pakistan's constitution still has many deficits and shortcomings and areas of improvement, but 18th constitutional amendment was a big, genuine democratic step to make Pakistani federation inclusive and decentralized. So now let us discuss and highlight some basic features of 18th constitutional amendment. First of all, 18th constitutional amendment tried to restore the original federal spirit of 1973 constitution, and it abolished 8th amendment, which was made by Ziaul Haq's military regime. It also abolished and abandoned the 17th constitutional amendment that was made by Pervez Musharraf's military regime and government. And with that, 18th Amendment also incorporated some new clauses and articles in the Constitution, and in totality, out of 286 articles, 18th Constitutional Amendment amended or altered some 103 articles of the Constitution. So, we can say it was a significant move to restore 1973 Constitution, and I would say after the passage of 18th Constitutional Amendment, the Constitution is even much better than the original 1973 Constitution in many respects. For example, the Pakistan's Constitution claims that Pakistan is a parliamentary democracy, and during the 8th Amendment and 17th Amendment, the basic authorities and powers were shifted from Parliament, and those were sent to the Presidency, and that is not a federal practice in parliament democracy. But in 18th Amendment, all those powers were again transferred to the Parliament, and now Parliament happens to be more stronger and empowered than it used to be in the past. Secondly, there was an old demand in Pakistan that the concurrent list should be abolished, and this was a major demand by the smaller provinces, KPK and Balochistan and Sindh, and all the progressive and political forces of Pakistan kept demanding that this should be abolished, because the practice of concurrent list was basically a colonial sort of thing that created overriding of powers by the center, and in that list the subjects were shared between the provinces and the federation, but in the case of any dispute on any matter, the center or the federal government had the final say on that matter. But in 18th Constitutional Amendment, this concurrent list was abolished. And out of 47 subjects, 7 subjects were sent to the Federalist 2, that is Council of Common Interest, and some 39 subjects were shifted and transferred to the provinces, and 17 ministries were also shifted to the provinces, because those were based on those 39 subjects. In 18th Constitutional Amendment, the good thing is that now there is no discretionary authority and power to any individual, for example, President or the Prime Minister or the Chief Justice. So, now the discretionary powers were shifted to the institutions instead of individuals. I think this was a much development. Fundamental rights. In Pakistan's constitution, we have fundamental rights of the citizens from Article 8 to Article 28. But in 18th Constitutional Amendment, 3 more articles, Article 10A, Article 19A, Article 25A were added into those fundamental rights. The role of Senate, as we all know that all the federations in the world, they have bicameral legislature, means they have 2 chambers in the federal parliament. One chamber is based on demography and population, and that is considered as a lower house, and one chamber is considered as an upper house, that is Senate, because that chamber is not a demographic chamber, and keeping in view the demographic imbalances in all the federations, so Senate happens to be the territorial chamber of the federation or the house of the federation. But unfortunately, in Pakistan, when the house was created in 1973's constitution, the Senate was termed as an upper house, but on the contrary, the house did not have actual final say on all federal matters. But in 18th Amendment, the House of Senate was relatively more empowered, though I strongly believe that still the Senate is not an upper house in real sense, and that should be given more authorities and powers, especially when it comes to the intergovernmental, interprovincial matters or all the pertinent federal matters. But relatively, the House of Senate, because now the cabinet is made bound to report to the House of Senate, and the reports of the Council of Common Interest, the reports of the ACNIC and many other federal institutions, those reports are supposed to be also submitted before the House of the Senate, and that was also a big significant. Local government, as we all know that in all the federations, since the federations are based on the principles of decentralization and delegation of authorities to the provinces and the local governments. But in Pakistan, unfortunately, all the local government systems were introduced by the military regimes. In 1959, Ayub Khan introduced this system in the form of basic democracy. In 1979, Ziaul introduced this system, and in 2002, Pervez Musharraf introduced this local government system. But this was perhaps first time in the history of Pakistan that under Article 140A, the local government system was made obligatory, and it was made a provincial subject, and that is a very common practice in all the federations of the world. And now all the provinces have their own provincial acts of local governments, but those are not very much functional in reality. That's a big challenge. 18th Constitutional Amendment tried to make a balance of power among the trichotomy of power in the state business, and that is parliament and executive and judiciary. But along with that, an abolition of the concurrent list and the provincial autonomy was relatively made better. Along with those areas, 18th Constitutional Amendment also modified the Council of Common Interest. We all know that in all the federations there are some conflict resolution mechanisms which work to prevent and manage and conflicts among the governments, among the provinces. And in 1973, this house was created, but it was not that much empowered and structurally balanced. And in 18th Constitutional Amendment, it was relatively restructured in a better way. And secondly, it was made obligatory that the council would meet on quarterly basis, and they should have a permanent secretary as well. And this is how this very significant and important forum of the federation was redesigned, restructured, modified, and strengthened. Secondly, as we all know that federalism has three shades: political federalism and cultural federalism and economic or fiscal federalism. So before this amendment in 2009, 7th NFC award was done, and in that NFC award, the share of the provinces in NFC award was fixed as 56%. So keeping in view the past bitter experiences, the 18th Constitutional Amendment constitutionally secured the fiscal share of the provinces in NFC award, and now no government can decrease the share of the provinces without having a proper amendment in the constitution. So in a way, the fiscal rights of the provinces were also secured in 18th Constitutional Amendment. Last two things, that judiciary, as we all know, that is one of the key pillars of the federation and the democracy and the state, because it is one of the three pillars of the trichotomy of power in the political system. In 18th Constitutional Amendment, Supreme Judicial Council was established, and now the judiciary is more democratized and more institutionalized as compared to the past practices, and that was also an achievement on the account of 18th Constitutional Amendment. So in totality, we can say that 18th Constitutional Amendment did not only restore the spirit of 73 Constitution, it did not only improve the political health of the Constitution on the basis of federal principles, but 18th Constitutional Amendment, I strongly believe, was a good, substantial first step to make Pakistan an inclusive, democratic and viable federation. And the last thing that I would like to say, that 10 years, almost a decade has been passed, but still the implementation of the 18th Constitutional Amendment in letter and spirit is a big challenge, and that needs to be addressed at all three levels, be it federal level, provincial level or the local government level.